He was like, hey, we are gonna beat Microsoft. And I'm like, okay, let's talk. He decides, you know what? I'm gonna create AGI. And here's the cool part. That's why many people passed on it back then. No one cared about context window. Who cares? These guys don't even have like a college degree. Why should we care about that? And yeah, I think personally we really had like a very strong belief in Eric, and I'm glad we were the institutional investor who decided to join the first round, and turned out pretty well for us. A war is happening. He's powering his laptop with a car battery or something. Again, just bootstrap. Keeps working, keeps working, keeps working. His apps goes viral. Snapchat hears of him. And honestly, kudos to Snapchat that did not back out from buying a company in Syria by a guy in a war zone.
A lot of times when I have guests on the show, I've talked to early investors in Lyft, Pinterest, Facebook, Palantir, etc. A lot of times they've backed billion-dollar companies, and it's been a while since they have actually written the original check. Today's guest is a relatively new venture capitalist. Usually my guests, they have 20, 30 years of experience, or at least 10 or 15. Today's guest is still new. He's young. He's been in the game for 2 years, and he's already backed a billion-dollar startup. So you might ask me, well, why do you have someone so new? Well, it's because he hasn't had that much time pass. So he actually remembers the deal. He remembers the details. He remembers what made them special. He remembers why he wrote that check. And that's what I've been after. I want the details. I want to know why do unicorns become unicorns? How are billion-dollar companies built, and why do investors decide to fund them? And so the more recent it is, the more details you get. And so that's why I'm interviewing today. We'll also talk about a number of other things, fundraising tips, how to be a good storyteller. For that, I'm your host, Burke. I founded my first startup at 13, scaled that to about 10,000 users, $150,000 in grants, ended up having my first exit at 16. And this is the Builders and Funders Show. The thesis behind all of this is the world around us is built by those who build it and those who fund them. And so this show covers stories behind those builders and funders, hence the name. So without further ado, Omar, welcome to the Builders and Funders Show.
Thanks a lot for having me. Quite an impressive background you have, and pleasure to be talking and meeting you.
Thank you. Absolutely. Well, let's get started with a little bit of your backstory. And so, for those of you that don't know, you're from Egypt, and you actually left Egypt for Germany because you were expelled from university for organizing a strike. Tell me about that. Let's talk a little bit about your backstory.
Yeah, sure thing. So my background had really nothing to do with venture capital whatsoever. I was a geek. I started coding when I was very young, did the competitive programming jam, and I thought I was destined to be an engineer who goes to Google, and that's it. That was the plan. And then when I was 19, I was in a very comfortable position actually back then. I got a scholarship. I was at private university. I was living in a very safe compound in a private dorms where people were cooking for me, cleaning for me, taking care of all of my needs. I just had to study. And all it took was 2 weeks for my life to come crashing down. As you mentioned, like we had a situation at the university. A colleague had passed away in terrible circumstances, and we didn't like that. So we protested. The university ignored us. We just wanted them to speak with us as the students' union. Ignored us. Then we striked. They ignored us. Then we had exams, and we decided to boycott the exams till we come to an agreement. The professors kept saying, "Yeah, it's just because you guys did not study." Blah 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 blah. I believed them. I was the top ranked student back then. So I thought to do the right thing, sign the petition with the other top ranked students from different faculties saying, hey, we're the best you have. We are not going to go for the exams. Talk to us. For my bad luck, this ended up blowing up in my face. And yeah, had to start all over again. Had to learn German, do my bachelor over again. But again, like I think for me, at least I bought the realization of what kind of person I am and what kind of person I would have been if I was born in any different historical epoch, I would say. So yeah, lost few years, but bought myself. So it was worth trade.
So you might have been stoned for heresy in another
Most
another
probably.
time period. Make Makes sense. So you go to Germany, just for those listening to understand, and I want to ask you a little bit about how you got into venture capital, particularly because a lot of times we listen to venture capitalists, and I remember pitching back when I was building these companies, and a lot of times you think the person in front of you is just someone who writes a check, but obviously they've got their own story, and so one of the reasons I wanted to build a show is because as much as they're the stories of the founders are out there a lot, those who fund them, we don't get their side of the story as often. So, like, tell me about, you go to Germany, you're doing your bachelor's there, you're learning German. Why venture capital? Why go from want to be an engineer to a venture capitalist?
Yeah, so this came quite late. So I think that was maybe the last semester of my master's. I was doing my master's in AI, and for some reason, I kept having this recurring anxiety attacks. So for 6 months, I didn't know what I want to do with my life. I just kept having this feeling I cannot perform anymore. I cannot do anything anymore. So I took time out off, and I just started reading books about people I found inspiring, trying to find, okay, what do I want to do with my life? And I remember like the first books I read, one was the life story of Steve Jobs, very cliche, I know. The other was about Elon Musk, and the third, it was an ancient book from Bill Gates. It was not his life story. It's called The Road Ahead. He starts the book saying, "It's the year 1995, and I'm sitting in my hut thinking about the future." And he was thinking the road ahead and the what did he call it? The information highway. That's what we call today the internet. And he was just like trying to imagine how it would look like. And then it struck me that these people felt very fulfilled, and all they had in common, they were building companies. And this was a very interesting realization for me. Somehow I didn't realize that people can just build companies. Like, I mean, you obviously know it, but if it's not in the realm of ideas you think of, it's a very bizarre thing that just an individual can start a company and become like Apple or Microsoft, right? So I found this idea interesting, but I didn't know what could I do with it. I had no skill set that's relevant whatsoever apart from engineering, right? So the first move was I joined a startup. They were trying to program viruses to kill bacteria. I thought I can code. How hard is that? Turns out pretty hard, but it's a great learning experience. Then I joined an accelerator, which was very interesting. The concept was unique, where they match talents with startups. And if there is a match, they treat you as if you were a co founder. So I was sort of like a CTO for 3 months of a company as a young startup. And then I remember during this program, there was a talk we had with a VC. And Burke, I shit you not, I couldn't believe that's a real job. Like I remember literally it was a Zoom call. I asked the guy, and said, "Hey, is that like a real job?" Because I thought you have to be a billionaire and investing your own money. I was like, "Yeah, it is actually a job. You know, you raise money from people and you invest." I was like, "Why? Like, how does that work?" And I think this was the moment that it clicked for me. Like, I believe each of us, you are born with like a unique DNA, a unique circumstances that shapes you. And for me as a child, I remember growing up always writing stories about having a time machine and getting to live in the future. And finally I discovered I could have this as a career where I'm getting paid to live in the future, see how, the future would look like, speak with the smartest people out there. And somehow I found my ikigai. So by day, I speak with founders. By night, I still build my own software and my own micro SaaS solutions. And both feed into one another. And I couldn't be happier. And that's how I actually got over my anxiety and shit. So, yeah, that's why VC.
That's awesome. So you're basically you're still a founder. Nights and weekends, you're still building your own little products and software and projects, but you're also a venture capitalist. You're actually deciding to write checks. That's absolutely amazing. One of the reasons, Omar, that I want to interview you is because you're still in the beginning stages of being a VC. You're making those foundational observations about the dynamics, and so a lot of times when you interview someone who's been a venture capitalist or investor for 30 years, they're so far removed from the foundations or the basics of it that sometimes they start talking all this advanced game and you're like,
Exactly.
okay, but tell me about like the basics, like tell me about really just getting started. And so that's why I wanted to interview you, because you've done 18 deals so far. You've gotten to analyze a few hundred more, but you've invested in 18 companies, and one of them have actually turned out to be $1 billion company, which is awesome. So let's get to that story. Magic.dev was your first ever unicorn deal. When we were doing the prep call for this interview, you mentioned that a lot of VCs actually didn't want to invest in that company. You usually tend to follow at 10x founders, but you decide to lead. You decided to make an exception because you believed in this when no one else did. Tell me about that story.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so that was like it was really interesting. I was really nervous when we did this deal back then because I felt my reputation was on the line as a newbie, basically. So the story goes like this: we at 10x Founder we have this interesting concept of fellows. So these are like super angels, people we really like, who have a very strong network. So we get this deal through one of them, Daniel Diepel. He's the founder of Evo right now. Became a very good friend afterwards, and he was like, "Yeah, talk to Eric. Very smart guy. You should just talk to him." I was like, okay, let's go. The pitch deck had basically mainly one slide. It's called the perplexity metric, just like showing what they have achieved in perplexity. Again, I'm a very young investor. I'm just starting out, and I'm talking to this guy who seems brilliant, but again, like the storyline is just like, hey, we are gonna beat Microsoft. And you're like, okay, let's talk. Let's talk. Um, I talked to Eric. It's one of the most fascinating stories that I heard in venture capital, even till today. The guy already built and sold one of the best AI poker players, and he was in high school back then. He created an apprenticeship for himself by reaching out to researchers when he was in high school, telling them, "Hey, just bash me. I will try to do research. I'll try to beat you, and just bash my research, and just bash my research." And he keeps doing this. Then, when he goes to university, he joins Cambridge. He finds a paper that was published by Meta back then, it was Facebook AI Research Lab. It was not implemented. He takes it, he implements it, he improves on it, makes it open source. Meta's like, who the fuck is this guy? Let's hire him. He joins them as a working student and he steals manages to be at the state of the art in reinforcement learning. They make him an offer to join them. He's like, no, 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 no. I need to save the world from climate change. Goes, builds one of, by the way, one of the biggest NGOs for climate change called Climate Science. And the domain was available for that, just to imagine how early that was. Um, and then he decides, you know what? I'm going to create AGI. And here's the cool part. That's why many people passed on it back then. His pitch was, hey, I think I was very lucky because I was also one of the people who started Tum AI. By now, it's the biggest AI student initiative in Europe. And we were very lucky that we got to play with the OpenAI models way before ChatGPT. And I knew the problem of missing context window, like the limited context window we were speaking back then, 2000 tokens or something. And Eric was speaking of millions already and had like very interesting insights how this could work. So I was very intrigued. I was like, oh my God, if that could work, that could be life changing. I mean, imagine like you can understand your full code base. Like literally how they pitched it. Imagine having Steve Wozniak on a chip. And I was like, yes, if you can do this, and that would be very valuable. However, interestingly, because that was before ChatGPT, when we shared it with other people who we wanted to read and like join us, no one cared. It was not the hot thing. It was not the hype thing. No one cared about context window. Who cares? These guys don't even have like a college degree. Why should we care about that? And yeah, I think personally we really had like a very strong belief in Eric, and I'm glad we were the institutional investor who decided to join their first round and turned out pretty well for us, I guess.
That's fascinating. I picked up on two lessons there. One is for founders, one is for investors. The first one for founders is with what Eric was doing. He was doing what Paul Graham and every other investor says, living the future. But it's interesting because he had this intellectual curiosity and he just explored a bunch of different stuff. And I was talking to one of my first ever interviewees was a gentleman called Justin Stanford. He had a very similar story, but with cybersecurity. He grew up on some farm in South Africa, became fascinated with the internet as it was just coming up in the, I believe, 90s, 80s, etc. And so as he's learning about the internet, he discovers, he's like, look, these machines are going to become super popular. Everyone's going to have a computer. It's obvious. The utility, the value is there. But when that does happen, we're going to need security because if the more integrated it becomes to your life, the more chances for someone who's a bad actor to somehow take advantage of it. And so I see the same kind of pattern here where he had this just curiosity about everything and he decides, you know what, AI is possible. It can happen and we can add more context windows and all this kind of stuff. We just, need the tech to get there and he starts living the future. So I guess that's the lesson I'm picking up for founders. Be extremely curious, just observe. And, he's going, obviously studying at Cambridge and reaching out to researchers at a young age. I think that's a good lesson for founders. The best founders are the ones who are the most curious. And then actually, before I move on to my other takeaway, what do you think about that takeaway? Anything you'd like to add?
No, 100%. And maybe just to add to it, so Eric ended up actually dropping out of university. And I think that's also, there is a lesson there. I believe we are very lucky that we live in a world where if you want to learn anything, you can learn it. You do not need a college degree, you do not need a university degree. Personally, I really regret the years I had to put into university. I feel I learned much faster on my own. And I would really like, recommend people to do that. If you look at the youngest self-made billionaire, the founder of Luminar, he was fascinated by lasers and by these types of sensors. He ended up creating the company that made the youngest self-made billionaire ever. And I just hope, as you said, best founders are curious, follow your curiosity. And I think if you're living in the West, you're really playing life on the easy like mode. You're not gonna starve if you drop out of university, maybe for a few years to try something out. So you owe it for the rest of humanity to just follow your passion. It could be at university, absolutely fine, but it doesn't have to be. And I hope more people realize that.
That's fascinating. Well, let me ask you about that then. So you mentioned that, he ended up dropping out of college and now he's built $1 billion company, which is awesome. That's like, everyone talks about that. But let's talk about learning for a second because you've gone to as a venture capitalist, you get to talk to a lot of founders, you get to see how their mind works and how they learn, particularly their habits around that. Especially with Eric, again, such an exceptional founder. There are a few different parts I want to kind of divide this question into, but I'll just ask like the high level, which is how do these people design their information pipeline? How do they learn? Like, how do they learn how to learn? What does that look like? What resources do they go to? Like, I listened to a podcast called "How to Take Over the World" by Ben Wilson. I know the name's a little interesting, but one of the things he had a episode on Alexander Hamilton, and something he said interesting was Alexander Hamilton would read a book and then put that into action, whatever it was, and then write about it, and then go and teach other people about it. So use those like four tools almost to like master any subject from law to whatever other subjects he was studying. So like, how do the best founders learn? What are some habits they have around that?
It's a beautiful question. It reminds me of what I think you said that while we were talking the prep call when you said you're very young, right? You're very young and you're here, and you just did not want to read and not do anything because you felt like, just a waste of time. And I believe so as well. Like, knowledge is earned and you have to work for it. And as you said, like, I think the best founders, what they do is, like, I really like the German expression for, like, trying to understand something, how they say it. It's like, taking the idea, like, outside under that's, and like, just like take the idea, break it out, And I think the best founders have this beautiful ability of understanding something on so many different abstractions level that if you speak with your grandma, they'll be able to explain it to her. If they speak with an expert, they're able to speak their language. You're speaking to the salespeople, they're able to speak their language. And the only way to do this is to force yourself to explain the stuff to yourself and see how deep you can get. I mean, Richard Feynman was very famous for that. Like, he will take an idea, try to write about it from scratch, and whenever his understanding breaks, he goes and revises the concept again and try to write about it again. So that's one way. I think apprenticeship is the best way to learn. And some people like Eric, they do self apprenticeship by they go and seek their mentor. They do not wait for a chance. They're like, hey, and if you're very young, people are really willing to help you. Like, if you're a young person, you reach out to a researcher, you just, hey, I want to beat your research. I really admire, but I want to beat it. Can you help me? I just need 30 minutes from you once every few weeks. People would be willing to do that. So find a mentor would be something that I would really recommend. And finally, just exactly what you said. Like, if you're learning, I don't know, how to build AI, go and write it. Like, just go and write. Like, Eric always tells the story. The first paper he ever read, it took him 2 months to understand even what it was doing, right? It takes time, but with time, it combines. And the coolest thing about it is you can then build a repository of such unique, interesting ideas that the next big thing, as you said, it's like living in the future, becomes very near to you. You can combine ideas, you can synthesize. Because what is creativity? You synthesize ideas that no one else thought about before. And there was a very interesting research about papers who got like mostly cited. Heavy citations change the world. They always have 90% citations from usual fields that you'd expect, but 10% very bizarre fields, like, I don't know, philosophy or something completely unrelated. And that's how you get like very creative. So be curious, read a lot, try to implement the things that you read, and seek a mentor that can guide you.
Interesting. Let me just so I can first is like break it down to its first principles, like kind of what Feynman did, like learn about its very basics, or Elon Musk says like knowledge is a tree, learn about its roots first, and then try to write it down or just get it to a point where you could explain it like down to your grandma basically, or like some 5 year old. Like just be able to get to a point where you can teach it, and then go find mentors. I actually want to talk about an example like I found out. So I had an e-commerce company at one point, and we kept running ads, and we got like 3,000 traffic to it within like a week or so. 3,000 people visited the website, but we had a conversion rate that was below 1%. So I'm sitting there thinking we're getting all this traffic, but we're not converting. So I reached out to a few people who had backed a few successful e-commerce companies, and I said, look, you've been investors in this stuff. And I reached out to a few founders as well, just kind of get their take. So I had meetings with them, and I said, here's everything we're doing. What am I doing wrong? And like we went through and for 2 hours just wrote like documents and documents of notes on do this, do that, do this to improve your bottom of funnel conversions. And sure enough, we improved that. So I tell the story just to kind of emphasize a point of, if you reach out to people, say, I have this specific problem, help me out, they'll do it.
Exactly. People are beautiful. Like, I mean, most people want to do good. Most people, I believe, are good human beings. And if you just reach out and they can help, many people would take the time.
Yeah. And then I want to talk about, so I mentioned I had two big takeaways from your first billion-dollar company. The second was for investors. I think the big thing that helped you see what other investors couldn't is a lot of investors, they come from maybe business backgrounds, maybe they were a founder before, or they come from completely finance, MBA, just went to good school, did all that, became an associate, rose up, etc. But with you, because of your engineering background, when it comes to backing tech companies, being technically curious is, I guess, the most important thing you have. And so the fact that you were an engineer with only 18 deals, getting that $1 billion company, it seems like the biggest contributor to that is like you invest in tech companies, but you don't do that as a finance or business guy. You do that as an engineer who's personally fascinated with the tech, which I think, I guess, is a big contributor to that, right?
Um, Again, I don't want to take so much credit here because my imposter syndrome right now is above the roof. I think, yes, like being curious about technology definitely helps. If you understand the limitations of technology, which is very important, definitely helps because you can see the problems. And even if you don't have that, be curious about the people. Like I think the best entrepreneurs would guide you. So if you just like be curious about people and then figure out, okay, why is a very smart person deciding to spend time on something that maybe on a first look you say, yeah, LLMs, context window, why should I care? But the person is very smart. They might see something you don't. Why don't you be curious about them? It can take you very far.
That makes a lot of sense. And then I want to talk about some of these other stories. So one of the reasons I wanted to build this show is because I think there's so many incredible stories out there, and a lot of podcasts. One is they don't go deep enough on these stories. They don't really analyze them. They just stay at surface level. And second is they often ask for advice without the story. So a lot of people have a hard time comprehending. That's what I personally used to do, at least. And so there are a few stories you told me that really stood out to me from your portfolios or founders you've met that I think could be useful to the founders listening, even if not tactically, in some inspirational sense, could help them. The first one is the Syrian founder that you talked to and I believe backed. He had sold a company to Snapchat while working out of a war zone in Syria. Tell me about that story, Omar.
Again, it's like one of the founders you have to fall in love with. Um, yeah, so Faiz, founder of AQL, brilliant guy, brilliant guy. He was obsessed with robotics since he was very, very young, which basically sort of forced his father to introduce the first Lego league into Syria back then. Um, he loved that. He was always working on it. And again, his life changed at some point. He was starting in university. The Arab Spring broke. I think it really shaped all of us, like in this generation. And he was helping organize the protest against the dictator back then, who just got actually. When we talked last time, he was still in power and just now is gone, which is fascinating. But anyways, he's
Assad's
organizing the
out, yeah.
protest. Exactly. He was organizing the protest against Assad. His best friend gets taken to as a political prisoner, so he has to leave in 24 hours. How he tells the story, he leaves with like his musical keyboard and a laptop, goes to Egypt, middle of no freaking where. I still cannot believe he started the company there, because this was the only place he could like start a degree. So he starts building a company. Back then it was, again, you speak about generative AI very very early on. Like it was a beautiful product. You give it like a musical note, generates like an actual person who plays the note very like accurately, and he wanted to teach himself how to play the piano, how to play the musical keyboard. And he starts with that. Luckily, he manages. to get back home, but again, a war is happening. He's powering his laptop with a car battery or something. Again, just bootstrap. Keeps working, keeps working, keeps working. His apps goes viral. Snapchat hears of him. And honestly, kudos to Snapchat that did not back out from buying a company in Syria by a guy in a war zone. But yeah, they bought his company. He moves to Finland, and just to show you the resilience of this person, like he spent 2 years. They had an overlap where 1 month he's in Finland, waking up, you know, the birds are singing, everything is going on, life is good. Then the next month he's finishing his medical degree. He became a doctor eventually, MD, in a war zone, and yeah, like just amazing guy, amazing guy.
Wow, that's incredible. And then there's another, I think, Indonesian founder that you had backed that was saved by German special forces at some point, and he just felt so grateful that he wanted to go build a chip company. Tell me about that story. I think that's inspirational as well.
Yeah, it's a very good friend. Unfortunately, we're not investors in this company, but again, I'm so happy for them that they just closed the round, and I'm so happy for them. Yeah, so Michael is half German, half Chinese actually, and he grew up in all over the world, but at some point he was in Indonesia. Um, Unfortunately, there was some sort of a massacre against people from his ethnicity, and luckily they were saved by the special forces, which gives him, the motivation to join and hopefully save people. He does that, rises through the ranks. Very smart guy. He's a researcher, a soldier, a warrior, everything you would like to call for. But he always had this need for security, and he ended up building a chip company that is extremely secure. If it works out, it really changes the world. That will be the first time we can compute with light instead of electricity, general purpose computing with light, and it could be really the next big thing in computing. So yeah, that was his story, and again, that's why I love this job. You get to meet these people. It's insane. I'm getting paid to meet these people. It's just unbelievable.
That's awesome. And then I want to one of the, as I mentioned before, one of the reasons I wanted to interview you was because you're learning the foundations of like how fundraising happens, how founders approach investors. You're still at that beginning point, which actually is an advantage more than disadvantage, especially when I'm interviewing you because you're not far removed from it. You haven't been doing it for so long that you've been desensitized to the basics. So one of the things we talked about was the levels of fundraising when we initially met. Tell me about what those levels are and maybe some stories pertaining to how companies have passed each level, etc.
Absolutely, and this is one of the things I really learned from my mentor. Everything is a game, and you should think of fundraising as a game with levels. It's the best way to think about it. So here's how it goes. In my mind, you have different levels. Level number one, you want to be on the radar. You want to get the attention of investors. And to understand it best, just think about the incentive of the investor in front of you. As you said, usually your first contact person is someone like me, someone maybe between 0 to 5 years of experience. What is our incentive structure? It's like, a lion pride. We are the little cub. We want to go into the nature, find the best deals, bring it back to the partnership, win them, build a reputation for ourselves, etc., etc., etc. So just think about that, right? That's our goal eventually. Good. Now, if you put yourself in our shoes, we are being bombarded by LinkedIn messages, emails, whatever. It's very hard to be on the top of things. And most of these emails, they will never be read because it's inhumanely possible to do all of that. Good. So how do you get the attention in the beginning? There are multiple ways. I mean, if you build a unicorn company before, your life is very easy. That's easy, right? But if you're like the rest of us, you're just starting out, what should you do? There are different strategies. I will tell you what I recommend, like maybe try to rank them. The best approach is if you come to me or to one of us by strong recommendation from someone we trust. Okay, how do you build that if you're just starting out? Easiest way, go look at the portfolio of funds you like and you would like to back you. Look at their portfolio, see what companies or founders you have something in common with. It could be industry, it could be having the same university, whatever, something in common. Reach out to them, to these founders, and try to be helpful. Build a relationship, try to be helpful to them, have a chat, pick their brains. And after a while, when you're actually fundraising, these will be the best sources of introduction to the investors you want. Because if a portfolio company of mine tells me, hey, Omar, this is one of the smartest people I know, you have to talk to them, I will leave everything, and this will be the number one thing I need to do. So that's one. Two, you can just put yourself in positions to be lucky, meaning we as investors, we're always looking for outlier people. This could be people living in a hacker house, people who, I don't know, achieved something, I don't know, IOI champions, whatever. Just being around these people, you could be one of them, you could be building something, or just be around them, be well networked, will put you on the radar of a lot of people, and you have investors running after you because they think there's something special there as well. So that's second approach. The third approach, I would have to give you credit for that, the Burke approach. Learn to write the best cold emails. Like literally, I still remember this was the best cold email I got. It was very precise. I saw it already. I was holding the phone. I saw the notification. I was like, who the fuck is this guy? I clicked, I replied to you, right? We didn't know each other before, but it was very well crafted. And you apply, you say, I'm 18 years old, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. Like, oh my God, who is that guy? And so if you cannot do these two things, which I think can be doable, just master the art of cold emails. Like Harry Stabbings always speak about that the only trait he found common in all of his unicorn founders, they can write the best cold emails. So these are the three approaches just to get across the first phase. So now you have the attention, right? And now you should think the investor sitting in front of you, deep inside, they are really rooting for you. Why? They already made the commitment to take 30 minutes of their time or 45 minutes to have a first call for you. The thing they would hate the most is this call to be a wasted time. They are really, really hoping you are the next deal they're going to make. You are the next big thing. Good. So they're already on your side, even if they do not show it. You should understand that. And now your mission is in level two. You, maybe to explain here, if you are someone like me, an investor, maybe in my week I would have 20 calls with 20 different startups. Good. My task at the end of the week, I should pick two or three that I will schedule a second call with and dig deeper on, because next week there is new 20 startups. So your goal is to be from this two or three. The best way to do it, in my opinion, is learning how to tell a story. And a story does not have to be long. I think one of the things that we always tell our portfolio founders, start thinking, what are the most impressive things about your company slash you, especially if you're in pre-seed. It could be your background, what you have achieved before. Start with that. Usually this dance of the first meeting goes like this. The investor would say, hey, let's have a short round of introductions to get to know each other, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's short on their side, not short on yours. Your story is the most important thing. Take time to pitch your story as a founder. What is the most exciting things about you? Put it all in a narrative. This is the first hook. This is what people would do. As I told you story of founders before. Whether I back them or not, I still remember it because it was very memorable. So try to figure out what's memorable about your story. Good. Once you have done that, just go start with an earthquake and never go down. Just what are the most exciting things? You finished your story. What are the most exciting things about your business? It could be angel investors you got. It could be the market. It could be product that you've built, traction, whatever. Start from there and just make sure the attention is always hooked, is always there. You want to be remembered by the end of the week. Amazing. Now, my final advice here would be, before you go to meet an investor, write down the most common questions you expect to be asked. For each question, put a one sentence answer in the second column, and in the last column, maybe 2 to 3 sentences to elaborate on that if needed. This is one of the best moves you will ever make. An investor asks you a question and you, bam, one sentence answer. Very precise, very to the point. If they want to follow on, they can follow on. An example, there's a company called Etched. I think now they're doing amazing. It's one of the companies I regret meeting very late in the process. The meeting I had with the founder took 15 minutes. He was like, yeah, I'm taking on NVIDIA, explained precisely how he will do it. Amazing. And I'm sure he put a lot of preparation into that. That's why I still remember it, right? He's also a very young founder. And I think if you do these things right, you are definitely making it to the last level. And the last level is, okay, the young investor, like, oh my God, I met something groundbreaking, goes and tries to get the attention of the rest of his fund, the rest of his team to hopefully invest in you. And then there's a lot of things you do there, how you manipulate it. But I think if you already do these two things right, you're already in the top, I think we looked at the numbers. Maybe if we speak with 10% of the companies we see, and from the 10%, maybe you found 0.1% or something. So you're already in the top decile anyways, just by mastering these few tricks. So yeah, just I will pause here. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take it.
Fascinating. I want to dig deeper on a couple of these things you said. So the third thing that you mentioned when you were talking about how to get the attention of an investor was be great at cold emails. Now I'm flattered by your comment, but I do want to dig deeper into that. What catches your attention in email? Obviously, if they're young, I have the advantage of being 18. I highly doubt my emails would be as effective if I didn't have that age advantage. That's great leverage for me. But like if you're say a 30-year-old founder, or you know, you're somewhere in that range where it doesn't immediately pop out, obviously then it's a little harder because that's not, you don't have that leverage. So
Yeah.
how, what kind of emails have you been sent before that have gotten your attention, and why do you think they particularly captured your attention?
Yeah. So a few things. One, what you shouldn't do. Most people start the email introducing themselves in a very, hey, I'm the VP of, or I am doing XYZ. No one cares because, again, think about this way. I see a notification on my phone. If I'm not hooked by the first two sentences, most probably I will not click and dig deeper, right? That's unfortunately the attention span we have right now. So that's, just keep this in mind. So goal is the first few sentences should make the person stop. And I believe every human being has something unique about them that will make a person, oh, what is this? So maybe you're 30 years old, but I don't know. You went hitchhiking around the world, or you won something, I don't know, IOI, for example. Or there is something unique about you, right? So start with the bam. You're just like, hey, I am this, or I have done this. I will stop. Like, okay, I need to know the rest of the story. Then very clearly show the person that this is not like a mass sent email, that there's something, that you care about them for. I believe you can be helpful for X, Y, Z. So there is a very clear ask. What do you want to do with this? And that's exactly what you have done. You started, I'm 18 years old. I built a podcast. I have this viewers, etc., etc., etc. Would you like to have a chat? I already saw most of the message on my notification. Like, okay, who is this guy who did this at 18 years old? Let's chat. So that would be my recommendation. Catch the attention, very clear ask, and make sure it's not like an ask. Like if you tell someone, hey, can we have 1 hour call? No one would do that. It's just like 15 minutes call, or maybe reply to this email with this, just something actionable that's very quick to get a yes to. I think most people will reply. And always, which is very helpful, if you see a commonality between you and the person, especially if it's a person who's a little bit older, and if they see a younger version of themselves in you or something, people would be really willing to give you the time of the day.
Yeah, I just want to add something on the part about not wanting too much off the get go. When I had Jeff Ralston on the show, he was a former president of Y Combinator. I had maybe 100 subscribers. I barely had any listeners, and he was my 23rd episode, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere around that range. And so when I asked him, why did you decide to come on this? Like, you don't do many interviews. The only ones that you've done are with like Harry Stebbings or whatnot, like these massive podcasters. Like, why me? And he's like, well, you were smart because you didn't ask for much. You said 15 minutes. So you got 15 minutes. I got 20 minutes, actually. I finessed the other five. But, you know, I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like, okay, so I just wanted to affirm what you said there. But
Yeah.
I do want to make a comment on something else you said, which is finding something that's impressive about you. You mentioned you're in like the depth of your like imposter syndrome right now. You're going through it. With a lot of founders I've met, it's the same thing where they don't, so like someone listening to this podcast, a lot of them are going to go, well, there's nothing that interesting about me, regardless of their whether there is or not. They're just gonna, there's that humility that people grow up with, and unfortunately it's beaten out of them, so they don't like to beat their chest a little bit. Or how would you, I know it's going to be like an ambiguous question, but like
No, no.
how do you deal with that? Like if you're a founder, you're going, man, there's nothing that interesting about me, I'm not that interesting, I'm not that impressive, I didn't
Yeah.
build anything in a war zone. What do you do? What do you
Yeah.
say? How do you get through
100%.
that?
And I totally get that. And I think there are two components that help you here. One, it is a game. Do not take yourself or anything, the fundraising, anything too seriously. It is a game. I understand. Naturally, you're trained to be humble, put yourself down, do not shine too much. Great. But this is a game. And your task is to dig deep, find what's impressive about you, and share it with the world. Why? Multiple reasons. Your company will not exist otherwise. The people that you're responsible for will not have salaries otherwise. So you have a duty to do this. One. Two, people who are, maybe that's putting the competitive part, people who are not as impressive as you are not as smart as you are doing this and winning. Why should you lose? Because someone told you when you are young, you should be humble. Third, you can still be humble, but share something impressive about you. Share your story. Who are you? You're not gonna go with people, hey, I'm the smartest kid that ever lived. No, you just share stuff that you have achieved. And again, have some empathy for the person in front of you. Let's say the investor. They would like to back the best people they could find. Just show them why you are one of the best people, right? They are on your side. They are rooting for you. They will, like what I'm doing right now. I'm telling the stories of people I've met before, right? It's a beautiful thing. And don't you want your story being told? Like, I'm sure there's something there. Just like, take the time and think about it. And do not put yourself down so much. Everyone has something. And if you don't have it right now, work on it and then build a company. It's fine. So these would be my thoughts.
So if you don't have, like, you could actually just go out there and acquire impressive titles, like, maybe Hitchhike Around the World or something.
I like what you said, follow your passion, right? Like, I mean, if you have been passionate about something for such a long time, right? Maybe okay, you're always curious about coding. You can go and teach yourself and achieve something there. But I truly believe everyone has something. I believe everyone has something. But if you really believe there is absolutely nothing, okay, then maybe you're not ready to build a company right now. Follow your passion, figure out what you like, be really good at something, and these things will come naturally to you. And then you can go and build a company. Absolutely no problem.
Interesting. And then something else you mentioned in your original reply on the levels is the regret part. There's often, I was shocked when I heard that investors have these things called anti-portfolios where they keep a track of their regrets. I think it was Frederick Gray who first told that. He was a venture capitalist at Techstars, and in our interview, he mentioned how he missed out on, I think, investing in a $2 billion company or $4 billion. They end up becoming massive. But tell me about some of your, like, the companies, some of your companies in the anti portfolio, some of those. Tell me about some of those regrets, Omar.
And there's so many of them that it hurts. I don't know, but I mean, the problem I think I'm having here is, as you said, like I'm very new in the business, and every company I speak about, it's very new. So I'm not sure if I should like share names or not, but maybe the ones that already became unicorns. So one of my deepest regrets is 11 Labs. I knew about them in pre-seed. My first thought was, okay, voice cloning. There will be 20 of them few months from now. Well, lo and behold, they managed to dominate the market. It still hurts me. I mean, I use the app. I use it to like read books and like read like stuff. And every time I use the app, I feel like a dagger in my heart. Uh, but this is like I think one of the biggest regrets I think about a lot. And there's many others who ended up like doing exceptionally well. Where I was offered maybe to invest at exactly as I said, maybe unfavorable terms. You think about it like, okay, really should really put it such a high valuation, and then they end up doing very well. Or someone who I really believed in, I really liked the founder, but didn't like the idea. They end up pivoting and conquering the world, or at least it seems like it. And you're like, well, everyone tells you when you're young, bet on the founders, everything else will sort itself out. You didn't, because you thought you were so smart. And yes, you had a point. The market was not good, but they pivoted. You should have backed them. So I think these are like the common patterns I've seen in my regrets. I will keep the other names for myself till like we see how the companies grow. But these are the things that seem to have been a breakout case, which we haven't done. Man, there's so many founder stories I should tell. I don't know. I'm just like people getting emotional here for a second.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, 11 Labs is what, a $1.1 billion company now. They raised over $110 million. That's
Maybe another,
fascinating.
maybe another founder was, I really love this guy. I think he's doing great. I can't wait to see his story. The company is called Cohelm right now. No, it's actually called Anterior right now. They changed the name three times. And this guy, again, one of the best stories I heard. He was the youngest military officer in the history of the UK. Went to Sandhurst without having like a dictator as a father or like a billionaire. Went to Sandhurst. He's a medical doctor, and he is has a master's in AI and worked at Google, right? And his first idea, just to show you how rapidly people can shift, his first idea was a company where you go to a food truck, you scan a QR code, and you can bid to skip the line. I love the guy. And the idea was a little bit edgy, like, you know what, we should do it. We did not, we ended up not doing it. It it breaks my heart still. It still breaks my heart just not backing someone like Abdurrahman here. They pivot. They are doing now AI for like healthcare, and the company like moved from London. Now it's in the US. They're really doing great. Hired an amazing team. Um, I think this would be something I would definitely like. Again, you always keep like I have a very good relationship with the founder, but it's one of these things that keeps reminding you that you should go back to the basics, as you said, bet on the right people, and things will work out eventually, hopefully at least. And if they don't, you will have a great portfolio of great people that you're very proud to have back.
That's awesome. Well, it's been a fascinating interview, Omar. I appreciate the humility. By the way, it's hard to always get investors to be honest about their misses as much as their wins. So, like the fact that you admit that, I think that's a big deal, and I think that should set an example for some of the older VCs. But I appreciate your time today. Are there any other stories or lessons you'd like to talk about before we end this off?
Nothing that immediately comes to mind, but same here. I really enjoyed this conversation. You're a very impressive person. I cannot believe you have achieved so much at 18 already. I can't wait to see what happens next. And I hope I have your promise. Whenever you are fundraising for a VC backed company, you will give me a call.